Okay, folks, it's time for the law of the sea and case studies. The law of the sea, also known as UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. You can either refer to it by its acronym, UNCLOS, or you can call it the Law of the Sea. It doesn't matter. So, it is the law of the sea created by the United Nations. The United Nations is a supranational organisation, and essentially, not that they call themselves this, but in my head, they're kind of the referee of the planet. They are trying to keep the peace. They were set up in 1945 after World War II to try and make sure that we never ended up back there again, for hopefully obvious reasons. And they've refereed things ever since. If countries fall out, they try to help. They have discussions about issues facing the planet to try and get countries to find a way forward together. Anyway, they do all sorts of really, really good things. This is kind of like the highway code for the seas. If you've started learning to drive, you will know that there is this document that tells you what you can and can't do and how fast you can go and who has right of way and all of that. This is that for the seas, and it's designed to try and keep the peace, and it's designed to try and help countries maximise their use of resources for their own economic benefit. Okay, so first things first. This is the baseline. This is where the measurements start from, and it's widely regarded to be low tide. You don't actually need to know that. I'm just telling you that because it kind of links to something you will learn in coasts. So you take a country's low tide line, and then the first 12 nautical miles, we are not going to get bogged down in the difference between a mile and a nautical mile. We are geographers. If you're a mariner, yes, it's important. It's not that important for us. So the first 12 nautical miles is part of your country. Okay, you set the rules. You get to say who is allowed in and out of that area. It's part of your country. Okay, so that's called your territorial sea. We're not particularly interested in airspace, but you can see that it also applies to your airspace as well. Right, the contiguous zone, some people are interested in, but it's not that important. I'll talk you through it, but I wouldn't want you to spend lots of revision time. The contiguous zone is not part of your country, and your laws do not apply. It's often referred to as the hot pursuit zone, because if somebody has committed a crime in your country and they are escaping on some kind of speedboat, I'd imagine, you are allowed to pursue and arrest them in the contiguous zone. Ditto, if you have good intelligence to suggest that there is criminal activity coming in to your country and they're currently in the contiguous zone, you can stop, search and arrest them. But that's it, and it's not very geographical, is it? So the first 12 nautical miles is part of your country. However, the first 200 nautical miles is really important for us. It's called the Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ. The thing about the EEZ is it's not yours as such, and your laws do not apply, but you do own all of the resources. Any fish, any oil, any gold, any coal, any uranium, any diamonds, any resources in that first 200 nautical miles belong to you. And this is really important because this is where countries can make their fortunes, basically. Anything beyond that is called the high seas or international waters. It belongs to everybody on the planet. We're all supposed to share it, and a video later on will talk about the global commons and the tragedy of the commons. We are all supposed to share the high seas, but we're not very good at doing that. Some people get greedy and take more than they should. It is worth just noting in one of the case studies that we're talking about, you can extend your EEZ if you can prove a good geological reason for doing so. And this is where the Arctic case study is important. But there is this caveat in the law of the sea, which is you can extend your EEZ if you can prove a good geological reason. So it is 200 miles usually, but there are some exceptions to that. Okay, so what we're going to look at is some case studies to exemplify this. If you've been thinking, what is a continental shelf? Like, what does that even mean? It's the stuff shown as turquoise on this map. Essentially, it's shallow seas. Okay, continental shelf during an ice age when the sea levels drop would be land. Okay, the dark blue, the deep oceans, would be ocean anyway, but during an ice age, yeah, anything that's the really kind of solid turquoise colour would be land at the time. So that's generally regarded to be continental shelf. Anyway, that's what that means in case you weren't sure about it. All right. Baseline we've talked about, and then I've given you more detail there. That map shows you where the EEZs are, which is the pale blue, and the high seas or the international waters, which is the dark blue. All the blobs, I'm sure you've worked this out for yourself, but all of the blobs are islands. As soon as you have an island, the law of the sea starts again. Okay, so you have your territorial, you have your EEZ, and that's really important for one of our case studies, which is the Falkland Islands. Also, I'm just going to draw your attention to this bit. So in the Arctic, we have this dark blue area of international waters, which the countries surrounding it are currently trying to claim as their own. They're trying to prove a geological reason to extend their exclusive economic zone. And this is the South China Sea. And you will hear a lot about this. So theoretically, look, that all belongs, but anyway, that's quite controversial. Right. This is not a key part of the syllabus. It's quite interesting, and it's just one of those things to be aware of, really, particularly if you ever go on a cruise. But in the high seas, if you were on a ship in that dark blue water, you might have been thinking, well, whose laws apply? Well, here's the law. The law applies to the of the country that they are flying the flag of. But what a lot of countries do is they register the ship and they fly the flag of a country that doesn't have particularly good laws or doesn't have a very big police force, because you can get away with more stuff. It's called a flag of convenience, and you can see that some of the biggest are countries that perhaps you wouldn't expect to be necessarily. And it's because if you do commit a crime, it would be the responsibility of the police from that country, and they often can't. They don't have the resources, and therefore it's a little loophole that means that people can get away with more stuff than they probably should be able to. Right, let's move on to the case studies. Right, so all I've got here is a little overview of each one, because there are 5, and I think it is a valid question to be like, why? Why so many, Nikki? North Sea proves that the law of the sea works. No one falls out. Everyone knows who's got what. Law of the sea works. South China Sea, controversial. Probably the most important case study of the 5, I would say, and it's all really beginning to kick off. So I'm talking to you in 2024, and yeah, it's getting really quite geopolitical there. The Falklands is, I suppose, in some ways looking back to the past, but the conflict has never really ended, and that is about arguing over EEZs. The Arctic is this loophole in the law of the sea where you can actually claim a bigger EEZ if you can prove a geological claim. That's going on at the moment. And then we have this amazing tribe in the Philippines called the Tagbanwa, who managed to get recognised under international law, which is, you know, a big up for the small groups. Okay, so there's a reminder of it. There is the North Sea. Notice that certainly in the English Channel, nobody has got a 200-mile EEZ, because there isn't 200 miles of EEZ in the English Channel. What happens in the North Sea is they usually go halfway. So if there isn't 200 miles to choose from, you do sort of a halfway thing. Anyway, it works. Everyone knows that's mine, that's yours, and these countries generally do not fall out. This is your case study to say, hey, look, the law of the sea works, it's really successful. South China Sea, not so much. China has something called the 9-dash line. Now, the red line is roughly that, but with significantly more than 9 dashes. Chinese cartographers drew China's borders, and for reasons that I am not entirely sure of, and I'm not sure anyone is, they added this line, which has no place in international law whatsoever. They just decided that they wanted it. It's kind of like me coming home and deciding I want a bigger garden, redrawing the borders on a map and saying to my neighbours, look, I'm sorry, the map says I own this, I'm having it. And that's kind of really what's going on at the moment. So they are claiming part of Vietnam's EEZ, part of the Philippines' EEZ, and they're claiming it as their own. And as you will find out in class, it's very controversial. America is involved, the UK is involved. There's escalating tensions between the Philippines and China. The Philippines have been to the United Nations. They've been to court over this. The United Nations ruled in favour of the Philippines. They said that China was acting illegally, and China has sort of basically gone, yeah, what are you going to do about it? So it's rising geopolitical tensions, and I will update you when we look in class, but just put it into a search engine, South China Sea, what's going on, or something like that, and you will find all sorts. I think China has now got the second biggest Coast Guard ship in the world, and they're spraying Philippine ships with water cannons and being really intimidating. So keep an eye, but that is an example of the law of the sea not being respected, not being followed. The Falklands, okay. Small islands off the coast of Argentina. Argentina would like to own them. The UK will not let them go. There has been a referendum of the people that actually live there, and it did go in favour of remaining British. But I'm sure it's very complicated politically, but what we say for this module is, if you own the island, you own the EEZ. If you own the EEZ, you own all of the resources in the EEZ. And we know now, we suspected before, but we now know that there are some very valuable resources in the EEZ, which is why the UK does not want to let go, and equally Argentina would quite like to have them back. So the Falklands War happened in 1982. It was a conflict over ownership of the Falklands between the UK and Argentina. It was very short, but it was pretty deadly, especially considering, the length of the war. Much more recently, but I suspect before any time that you were aware of, there is a TV programme called Top Gear, a car programme. And this is in the days where one of the presenters particularly was quite controversial, a man called Jeremy Clarkson. And they went and drove around Argentina in these cars. Now, the story is that these reg plates were entirely accidental, but Mm. 982 FKL, bearing in mind the Falklands War was in 1982, and then look at the death tolls, and they're quite similar to the other two cars. Basically, we're not at war with Argentina, but there is ongoing conflict and ongoing animosity, I would say, between the two countries over the ownership of the Falklands. But it's well worth Britain hanging on to it for the oil that seems to be there. And then, yeah, there was loads in 2022 because obviously it was a significant anniversary, but much of that will still be on the internet if you're interested. And then the Arctic, North Pole, remember, Arctic, North, Antarctica, more letters, so it was heavier and it sunk to the bottom. Very babyish. Antarctica is at the South Pole. So the Arctic, there is no land at the North Pole, it's sea ice. And we have this little old thing called climate change going on at the moment, which means that the sea ice is melting. And what that means is that ocean that was previously inaccessible because it was way too dangerous to dive under the ice to access the ocean floor, it used to be inaccessible, it's becoming more and more accessible. And as you can see, there is this area which I pointed out to you earlier in the middle, which is currently not part of anybody's EEZ. And these 5 countries are trying to work out who might claim it. Yeah, so they've all submitted their claims to the United Nations. If you want my opinion, if I was the United Nations, I would sit on that for as long as humanly possible, because I would not want to make the decision about who owned what, particularly if I have America and Russia in the mix. I would just be, delaying that in as much admin as humanly possible. So it's a watch this space, but not with bated breath, if you want my advice. The only other thing that you might know about the Arctic is the other thing about the sea ice melting is we might be able to change our shipping route. It's not often you hear about people saying, yay, there's a really good thing about climate change. And yeah, it's not good enough to outweigh the bad, but you can see that the blue dotted line, which is the kind of current standard route between Europe and China, is much longer than the red route. We shall see. So that's the other thing that might happen as Arctic ice melts. Shipping might change direction. And then the Tagbanwa. It's really simple. Do not put much time and effort into this. A very traditional tribe in the Philippines whose entire sort of way of life revolved around the oceans. And what happens under international law, fairly obviously, is that governments and powerful rich groups tend to get priority because they're powerful. And big and heard of. And little tribes like this can get very much overlooked. And essentially what they did is they fought for their right to maintain access to what they saw as their part of the ocean, and they won. So that's literally it. It's just sometimes the little people can win some rights. Okay. So that, folks, oh, my screen's going really weird, is the Law of the Sea. Thank you very much.